It was a chilly afternoon in the heart of the city, the kind of day when the glass windows of little cafes fogged up from the warmth inside while the streets outside carried the hustle of rushing footsteps and honking cars, and in the middle of one such cafe, a man in a perfectly tailored suit sat with a restless baby in his arms, the man's presence radiating power, wealth, and control, though in this moment he looked anything but in control as the infant in his arms cried relentlessly, her tiny face red from exertion, her small fists clenching and unclenching as if demanding the world's attention, and indeed, everyone in the cafe had turned their heads in that direction, whispering under their breaths, some annoyed at the disturbance, others curious about the sight of a man clearly wealthy and polished looking so helpless in front of a child. The man was none other than Adrian Cole, a millionaire CEO known for his ruthless business strategies, his bold investments, and his impenetrable persona that rarely revealed vulnerability, but right now he looked like any desperate father at his wit's end, rocking the baby gently yet failing to calm her, whispering words under his breath yet not able to soothe her cries, and across from him stood a young waitress, her hands nervously fidgeting with the order pad she had tucked into her apron, her blonde hair tied loosely back, strands escaping to frame her soft, worried face, and her eyes locked on the child with an instinct that came from years of hardship, care, and unspoken understanding of pain. Her name was Emily, and though to the world she was just a poor waitress scraping by to pay rent for a tiny apartment and save a few coins for her ailing mother's medicine, inside her heart lived a depth of empathy that no wealth could buy, and it was this empathy that now pushed her to step closer to the powerful man with the crying baby, ignoring the judgmental glances of her co-workers and customers who couldn't fathom why she was meddling in something that wasn't her concern. But Emily's concern was not the reputation of a millionaire CEO. It was the little baby whose sobs carried a plea she could almost feel in her bones, as though the child's cries resonated with the struggles of her own past when she too had cried out into a world that often ignored the powerless. Adrian looked up at Emily with eyes that were sharp yet desperate, eyes that silently asked for help without ever admitting weakness aloud, because men like him were not trained to ask for help, they were trained to command, to control, to conquer, and yet in this tiny cafe surrounded by strangers, Adrian Cole could not command his daughter's tears away. He could not control her cries, and so he watched with a conflicted mixture of suspicion and hope as Emily carefully extended her arms, her voice soft and steady, asking if she could try to help. And though his pride screamed at him to refuse, something deeper, something more primal, urged him to trust this young woman with the one thing that mattered most in his world, his daughter, his fragile link to a love lost, because what no one in the cafe knew was that Adrian's wife had passed away just weeks after childbirth, leaving him a broken man who buried his grief beneath endless work. But grief had a way of clawing out of its cage, and in his daughter's cries he heard echoes of that grief, raw and unrelenting. So when Emily gently took the baby into her arms, he held his breath as though surrendering control to a stranger. Yet in that surrender came a miracle he hadn't expected. For the moment Emily cradled the baby against her chest, swaying with an instinctive rhythm, whispering a soft lullaby that her mother used to sing to her when life was unbearably hard. The baby's cries softened, her little body relaxing, her sobs fading into whimpers until finally she nestled into Emily's shoulder, asleep within moments as though she had always belonged there, and the cafe that had been filled with noise now held its breath, every eye on the waitress who had done the unthinkable, calmed the child that even her millionaire father could not soothe, and Adrian's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't define, part awe, part gratitude, part something far more dangerous that stirred when he looked at this woman who seemed to carry warmth in her very soul, and yet he masked it behind a stoic expression, clearing his throat and thanking her with a stiffness that barely concealed his vulnerability. But Emily only smiled faintly, shaking her head as if no thanks was needed, because to her it wasn't about recognition, it was about the child, about doing what her heart told her was right, and she was about to step away when Adrian stopped her, his voice lower, his pride cracking just slightly as he asked her to sit for a moment, to tell him how she had known what to do, and Emily hesitated, caught between her duty as a waitress and the unusual request of a man who could change anyone's life with a single decision. But something in his tone, something in his eyes, compelled her to stay, and so she sat, telling him stories of her life, of caring for her younger siblings when her father had abandoned them, of how she had worked jobs since she was 15 to keep her family afloat, of the way hardship had taught her patience. And as Adrian listened, he felt walls inside him tremble, because here was a woman who had nothing yet seemed richer in compassion than anyone he had ever known. And as the baby slept peacefully in her arms, Adrian realized that in this cafe, on this ordinary day, something extraordinary had begun, a shift in his carefully controlled life, and though he didn't yet know where it would lead, he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward this waitress who had done the unthinkable. But as all powerful stories go, fate was not done weaving its threads, and in the shadows stood a man watching, a rival who had long awaited Adrian's moment of weakness, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed, as if already plotting how to use the scene against him, for in the world of the wealthy, even the smallest crack in armor could become a weapon in the hands of an enemy, and little did Emily know, by stepping into Adrian's world, she had stepped into a storm that could either destroy her or change her life forever.